welcome to the How to Be Good podcast. We are back with another show. But it's pretty windy outside, so we seem to be getting everything at the moment. So we've had, what have we had this year? We've had fires, the start of the year, I believe.
Yep.
And then a couple of weeks ago, we were having floods over in the eastern states. And today we've been issued with a cyclone warning for parts of WA. So it's a little bit hairy out there.
It is. The wind is picking up and I think it's hitting the coast tonight. So hopefully it's not going to go too close to Perth, but up north, I think people are worried.
That's right. And funnily enough, after the podcast that we had with Thomas Mortlock, where he talked about the 1 in 100 year events, we now have another 1 in 100 year events, exactly as he spoke about, and the information that he gave us there, that don't expect to have it only once in 100 years. That's not actually how it works.
Yeah, indeed. We'll see what's going to happen for the next couple of days and what damages we're going to hear about from further up north.
Absolutely. So we're going to batten down the hatches, hope for the best. Let's hope that people don't get hurt or injured and that they heed the advice of DFUS and are safe and carry on being safe.
So who do we have on for this week?
So this week we have Laura Hamilton O'Hara. She is the CEO of the Living Future Institute. And they've been working with a number of companies and developers and builders to come up and help construct some of the most environmentally sustainable buildings to date.
Some really exciting projects and we can't wait for you to listen to Laura.
Absolutely. So let's get straight to it and listen to the show. Hello and welcome to the How to Be Good podcast. I'm here with Laura Hamilton O'Hara, CEO of Living Future Institute Australia. How are you?
Hi, Gareth. Lovely to be here. I'm pretty well. It's kind of rainy outside, so it feels like quite a nice day to be inside having a cozy chat.
Excellent. I'm so glad. It's nice. So, could you take us on a little journey from where your career started to being the CEO of the Living Future Institute Australia and being one of the leading authorities on sustainability?
Sure. I always sort of struggle with these kind of questions because it kind of sounds like you've got everything together when you explain it in reverse. But of course, the experience itself was pretty squiggly and it certainly didn't have this through line that is clear to me now. So I am South African, as you might be able to hear from my accent. I grew up there and lived there till I was 25 and had a real passion for conservation, wanted to work in environmental law and studied law, except that I quickly learned that there was a lot to do with paperwork rather than being outside. So that sort of went off the table pretty quickly. And I started working at a company called HIV Management Solutions when I finished my degree. And I was working in HIV peer education and impact assessment and really looking at that as a huge problem in South Africa. Certainly at the time anyway, and had this parallel sort of conservation obsession and love of animals. And when I immigrated to Australia in my mid-20s, I was really trying to think about, what kind of career do I actually want? HIV, luckily, is not as big a issue here as it is there. And so for me, it certainly swung towards the conservation side, but still looking at sort of impact and how do you make the biggest impact that you can. And of course, the obvious answer was Taronga Zoo. So I went and worked at Taronga Zoo for a number of years. I ran their training institute and I was the community conservation manager and also worked on their impact grants for a bit. And then I came across an amazing organization called the Centre for Sustainability Leadership, where I studied as a fellow in 2013, I think it was now. And the aim of the centre, or CSL as we called it, was really to, instead of getting, the people in power to care, let's get people who care into positions of power. So really trying to up the leadership skills of the generation and the people who really want to make a difference. From there, it was really a supercharged journey. Part of it was the network that creates, but also it really helped me broaden my mind in terms of conservation. And it was very much a lived experience as well, in that you can't just focus on saving a rhino in order to save a rhino. You really have to look at the entire system. And my experience of that was absolutely true. So in South Africa, you can't just look at sort of an individual species or an individual area without looking at, who lives around there, what are their lives like, and how can you help uplift the community whilst also doing conservation. So really that systems view of things.
Yeah.
After CSL, pretty much everybody does something quite drastic with their lives, is one sort of trend I noticed. So take on a master's degree or travel or, quit their job, something like that. And I did a number of those things. My husband and I traveled around Australia for a year to get to know our adopted country. And I also did a master's in social ecology, which looks at the messy space between kind of culture and environment and economy and people, and how does that all sort of fit together. And when I got back, facilitated CSL for a number of years. And it was really that journey out of conservation, sustainability leadership, and sort of escalating, what are my skills? How can I make the biggest impact possible? Worked at Macquarie Uni for a little while. And then I had a small consultancy where I was doing some work around sustainability leadership within organizations. And then this role came up. And I think sustainability is a pretty kind of small part of the, Australian landscape. And everybody in sustainability that works there, everybody knows everybody, which is kind of great. And relationships are really important. So this role came up through an organization I had consulted to at one point. I had also spoken at Living Future Institute of Australia's conference one year. So really admired what they were doing, but had no experience in the built environment when this role came up. So I probably wouldn't have applied for it had a couple of people who I really trust and know and have worked with and who know me and know what I'm capable of and the work that I care about hadn't encouraged me to do that. And now it makes perfect sense because it is continuing my sort of drive and sort of impulse in terms of leveraging my impact and making the biggest sort of impact that I can. The built environment, as I'm sure you know, is responsible for a huge amount of the world's carbon emissions, so close on 40%. And if you think about every single thing that goes into a building and where it comes from and who worked on it and its entire life cycle, there's a lot of opportunities to create good. So it was absolutely a no-brainer for me to take this role. And I've been here almost 2 years.
Fantastic. So not to diminish anything else, I have to ask about the zoo, because you've poked on sort of a dream that most people tend to have, is like working in a zoo. I had it when I was young. I'm pretty sure my wife had it as well, didn't you? So,
I still have it.
So just to pander to our curiosity, tell us a little bit more about the work in the zoo, and also, what was your favorite animal?
I can't tell you how many times I've been asked that last question.
I bet it's very common. But
it's very common. And I definitely have different answers depending on how, what mood I'm in. But my most common answer is probably a giraffe. I have a great deal of respect for giraffes. I think they're incredibly calm and graceful, but they can certainly defend themselves when they need to. I love that they can see really far. They can see up to 1 kilometer. And there's something about that kind of calmness and being able to see far that I try and channel when I'm having like a really stressful day. Just be a giraffe. I also just think they're so symbolic of home for me.
Yeah.
The sort of very beautiful sunset imagery and that I've experienced many, many times, and you see it on basically every David Attenborough picture everywhere. Giraffes and a whole lot of giraffes together is called a journey. So a journey of giraffes, at sunset, walking along a hill, and they're in silhouette. And gosh, the world is a beautiful place when you get to see those things. So certainly a giraffe.
It is indeed.
Yeah. And working at Taronga Zoo, Taronga is a very special zoo. It's situated right on the harbour side of Sydney. It's the zoo with a view, and the giraffes have possibly the best one. It's a magical place to work for lots of reasons. One is you get to be part of enormously beneficial conservation programs. I think as wild spaces become more and more separated from each other, the wild and zoos are not, in fact, two different places. They're a continuum on the same conservation sphere. And zoo professionals nowadays have enormous skills in managing small populations and thinking about how do we make sure that their genetic integrity is preserved. And that is really helping to inform conservation in the wild as well, not to mention, rehabilitation and reintroductory programs. So that's pretty special. But easily the best part about working at the zoo was as you come down the hill at Taronga, there's the giraffes, as I said, and the amount of days where you got to see a 2 or 3 year old wide-eyed looking at giraffes and realizing for the first time that, oh, they exist. They're not in a storybook. That's pretty special.
Yeah, absolutely. So on a personal note, I still can't get over penguins. I just love the silliness, the playfulness, and yet the grace underwater of penguins. I think, yes, I think I'm probably empathise more with a penguin than anything else, but above water in their clumsiness, I think.
They're pretty great.
So they are. I love penguins. Anyway, so tell us more about Living Future Institute Australia.
Sure. So I think this is a story that probably needs a bit more of a step back. We are actually an affiliate of the International Living Future Institute, which is based out of Seattle. Its founder was a wonderful guy called Jason Mcclellan. He's an architect and a bit of a visionary. And it's us
architects. We're very good at this stuff. Sorry.
Are you an architect by any chance?
Oh, funnily enough.
Now that you mention it.
Yeah.
So Jason really was trying to think about the built environment, and obviously it's one of those things like food and clothing. The buildings that we make and how we build them really impacts and shapes our world quite drastically, and has such tremendous amount of impacts, whether that's positive or negative. And he was inspired by nature's architecture, and he thought, what if we could build buildings as beautiful and as efficient as a flower or a tree? What if a building could, generate all its own energy, collect all its own water, be completely suited to the place in which it's situated, is equitable, and anyone can enjoy that flower, and it's beautiful to boot, and not to mention it doesn't give off any pollution. So it's pretty amazing. So that, I guess, the what if statement is, what if we could build as beautifully as nature does? And from there, the Living Building Challenge was born, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But the Living Future Institute really thinks about how do you create a world that is socially just, culturally rich, and ecologically restorative? And that's the global vision. And it uses buildings as a vehicle to create that impact. As I said in the beginning, buildings, there's so many different ways in which you can positively impact the way something is built and maintained and its end of life, that it just seemed like an obvious leverage point within the system. So the International Living Future Institute was sort of established, I think, around 2008. And then in Australia, the Living Future Institute of Australia, or LFIA, was established by volunteers in 2012. So it's been around for a while. It was largely a volunteer-led organization until the last couple of years. We have an incredible board of really wonderful industry professionals at a high level who are really passionate about the building space and how do we show leadership in this sector. And we have a couple of staff members. I was, in fact, their first CEO and their first full-time staff member. So from little things, big things grow, I think, as the song goes.
Exactly.
And so thinking about the built environment itself, and I'll go back to the Living Building Challenge, because I think it's definitely the program we're most well known for. Globally, it is recognized as the most stringent sustainability standard in the world, as I said. So basically, it is a certification scheme, but it's much sort of further beyond that. It's also really a philosophy, and actually probably is going to fit in really beautifully with your podcast name. The philosophy that you always come back to in terms of the Living Building Challenge is, what does good look like? If you're uncertain about what to do when you're building a building, it's that. Come back to that. That's the first principle. What does good look like? And then building back from that, of course, there are categories. We actually call them petals. So we use the metaphor of a flower quite strongly in all the language. And so the categories or imperatives that you have to cover fall into petal categories. Some of them are quite expected, like energy and water and materials. But then we also have ones like place and beauty, health and happiness, as well as equity. And it's an all or nothing standard. You can't pick and choose. You have to do the entire thing. It's also performance-based. So you have to prove that your building says what it does is true over at least a year. And it's regenerative, right? So it goes far beyond sustainability. I'm noticing regenerative sort of design and architecture is becoming quite a buzzword now, but I'd really love to just say a few things about what it's about. And it really is that, it's not sustainable. Being sustainable is better than we've been doing, but it's not where we need to be either. We need to go beyond sustainability. Something that's always stuck in my mind, Andy Ridley, who was one of the co-founders of Earth Hour, said in a workshop once, if you described your marriage as sustainable, would that be a good thing? And that's always stuck in my mind. That we really want beyond that.
You'd be quite devastated if that was it.
Yeah, exactly. We really want to go beyond that, right? So we want to be talking about regenerative design, which is design that is giving back. It's not just, doing less bad. Yeah. It's quite involved thinking about it like that. Some of the simplest ways you can think about it is in terms of the energy petal, for example, a living building needs to generate at least 105% of its energy needs over a 12-month period. So it's putting back into the system. It's not just taking exactly what it needs. And that's true for every element of the building. It needs to be putting back into the system.
I really like the concept of the regenerative side. That really does fit well with where we need to go exactly. So there's a number of members of the Institute as well. And obviously you mentioned the very high-level board too. But being a member, what does that provide? What does that give?
There's a few reasons why somebody would want to become a member. The most simplest one is that your values and who you are as a person and what you're doing in the world aligns with what we're doing, and you want to support us as a not-for-profit. Another layer would be you yourself. You're an architect. You might want to increase your skills and learn about the Living Building Challenge. So we offer a number of educational courses as part of that. Then, Gareth, you might decide, actually, I need to build a living building. This sounds great. I'm going to build one. So in order to dig into what does that actually mean, so looking at the petal handbooks and things like that, you need to have membership to be able to really go right into the detail. So part of it is alignment with your values. Part of it is learning. And the other part, I guess, is creating. How do you actually build one of these buildings?
That's fantastic. So so the memberships are all for personal and for business as well. So both forms can interact. Is that right? Fantastic.
That's right. Yes. So we have quite a lot of corporate members, and they're often businesses that are in some way connected to what we're doing. There might be developers who are building living buildings. Frasers is a really good example. Or there might be manufacturers. So some of the manufacturers are really looking at circularity and materials transparency and carbon neutral and all of those kind of things in really quite progressive ways. And so they want to align their brand with what we're doing as well as, be part of a living building.
So with the manufacturers, do you have a certification for their products?
That's right, we do. It comes out of the International Living Future Institute. They develop and run all the certifications. For manufacturers, we've got this label called Declare. So Declare is all about materials transparency. And if you can just imagine it imagine a Vegemite jar, and on the Vegemite jar, there's a label that goes on it, and it tells you, what's in it exactly, all the ingredients, and where did it come from. It might even tell you things like, can it be recycled, that sort of thing. The Declare label is exactly that, except for materials. So it will tell you where it came from. It'll tell you every ingredient that's in it. And then it will tell you what happens to it end of life. Is it all recyclable? Does it have to go into landfill? What exactly can happen to this particular product? And part of the sort of rationale behind that is around materials transparency. For so long, we don't know what's in the things that go into our homes, the places that we spend so much time and space with, where we raise our children. And the idea behind the Living Building Challenge, as I said, what does good look like? How that translates in terms of materials and materials transparency is we should be putting things in our buildings that have no chance of causing cancer, not less chance, no chance of causing any kind of health problems. And so being transparent about what's in your ingredients is a way to help shift the market towards that. We have a whole list of, we call them the red list. It's kind of like the naughty list for Santa, but the red list of things that you cannot put in your building because they've got proven negative health effects, or they might bioaccumulate. So when they're present in lots of different things, they get washed down rivers and cause quite damaging impacts in terms of biodiversity. So it's looked at from multiple levels.
So you talked about the Living Future Institute touching on the building side of, I suppose, the circular economy. Are you at any point touching the food and the fashion industries at all in the buildings that you are obviously creating or certifying?
Definitely not in an obvious way. I think the philosophy could be applied to those two areas. Again, food and fashion are probably, along with buildings, the most sort of impactful industries. In terms of food, one of the imperatives as part of the Living Building Challenge is around urban agriculture. So you have to dedicate a portion of your site to urban agriculture, and that's around food resilience. So there's that piece of it, but it's not, there isn't a standard for food or fashion, but they could be the same principles could apply to it for sure.
Yeah. You have some strategic partners involved. What are their roles and how are they helping to create a more sustainable future or regenerative future?
So we are a for-purpose business. We generate most of our income through corporate sponsorship, as well as membership and events. So our partners are our sponsors, and the way that we sort of foster that partnership relationship is the organization needs to be very much on the journey in terms of regenerative design. They need to be doing things and showing continuous improvement in that to be a partner. I think one of our biggest roles in the market is around market transformation. So we don't work with perfection. In fact, I would argue that perfection doesn't necessarily exist, but we work with those that are really committed at a fundamental level to move the dial forward. And that could look like, as I said, developers or manufacturers, or maybe even some consultants who have got some deep specialist skills in terms of building a living building, and they want to be known for that. So all of our strategic partners are working in some way in the kind of complex ecosystem of the built environment and doing their bit of good where they are.
Excellent. You're not going out to ExxonMobil anytime soon then?
It's unlikely, but you know, they could transform.
You never know.
Exactly. In fact, it's those big organizations that have done so much damage in the past. When those guys flip, then you know we're on the path. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So could you tell us a little bit more about the restorative projects that you've been working on?
Sure. So we don't necessarily build the projects, but we help them happen. We support them. And that's through, it could be through collaboration with other industry bodies. It might be through some technical help or educational help. But we really sort of support those projects to happen, but they're driven by the project teams themselves. And there's a couple of really cool ones, I think, in Australia and New Zealand. The Living Building Challenge, as I said, is a challenge, and there's only 27 fully certified buildings around the world. We have one in Australia, and we also have one in New Zealand. We're a bit Australia, New Zealand. I'm gonna call us a hotspot for living buildings. There's quite a lot of projects happening around here, which is amazing. The two projects that I'd really love to highlight in Australia, the first one, which is the only certified living building in Australia. I was going to say the Centre for Sustainability Leadership there, the Sustainable Buildings Research Centre at the University of Wollongong, and they were an absolutely pioneering building. They I mean, if you're going to be the Sustainable Buildings Research Centre, you want to be sure that you're absolutely cutting edge, right? So, so they used, yeah, so they used that as a good reason to really build this which was at the time absolutely pioneering. They started thinking about it in sort of 2012, I think. So really early days. They also have used the building very much as a research center for kind of experimenting with new techniques and building methods. So it's the word living lab, or the words living labs, thrown around quite a lot at the moment, but they really are a living lab, and their whole building is used to figure out how to do things, which has been incredible. And every living building sort of makes it easier for the next one to happen, because you are transforming the supply chain and you're increasing skills. And you're also, I think, you come out with a building, but you also come out with a whole lot of people who are transformed by the process of building this building, because they've worked with a framework that is so holistic. And it's hard to unsee. Like, once you know, and the responsibility comes from knowing that you know, and you can't unsee it. So every project from then on has a bit of the spirit of the Living Building Challenge. So SBRC is pretty special, I think, because they were the first in Australia, and because they're so important in creating the future, both from an experimental and research level, but also because of the students that they bring through there, every day as they kind of educate that next generation. They're literally creating the future. So that one's pretty special. I'd say the next one I'd love to highlight is Burwood Brickworks. Burwood Brickworks is a shopping centre down in Melbourne. It just really did an incredible job sweeping a lot of the architectural awards this year. It is a remarkably beautiful shopping centre, and it was developed by Fraser's Property, who worked with us on a Living Building Challenge competition to design that particular building. And I hope you get a chance to go and see it, because it really does help you understand what a living building is. It's an incredibly efficient, technologically cutting edge building, but it's also really beautiful and full of light and design. It has almost 200 different reclaimed materials within that building.
Fantastic.
And that goes from all kinds of different things. There was a pier that was salvaged off the Sydney Opera House, and that's now installed as seating within that building. There's all sorts of like floorboards and bricks. As the name might suggest, it used to be an actual brickworks, and they managed to actually find a whole pallet of bricks that were produced there, and they put that back into the building. And they also got some bricks from a dismantled house and church in Toorak, and that they've also incorporated in that building as well. And then they've done really beautiful, clever things like the formwork that was part of the construction. They've made this incredible sculpture above a travelator. So what is waste, and how do you make waste beautiful? And waste is only waste when you waste it. It's this they're really rethinking what materials are about. And then, of course, they've got that urban farm on the roof as well. And millions of people are going to go and visit that centre. So I get to really experience what is a living building.
I was going to say, also, I think what should be amazing is the likes of the Brickworks is going to lead a bit of a path and a bit of a competition for the likes of Centre Group or Westfield, as they're known, and vicinity centres as well, to sort of say, oh, hang on, we've got to step up our game now. If we want to be known to be in this space, then they're going to really need to go that next level, rather than sort of pay a little homage to it, as has been so much of the case before.
Yeah, that's right. And part of the role of every living building is to set the bar and set the standard and prove that it's possible, right? I'm not going to kid anybody, it's hard, but the buildings exist, so it is possible. And each one of them kind of creates a little pathway to make the next one much easier to happen as well, as I said. So it really ups the game for everybody else once it's demonstrated as being possible. I'd just love to just talk about one other project, which is in New Zealand, actually. It's the Te Kura Whare, which is a Maori cultural centre, and it was built as a form of, I guess, restorative justice when the Crown paid reparations to the local Tūhoe Māori. And they decided to use some of that money to build Te Kura Whare, which is really kind of the best example, I think, of the equity petal. And they thought about, how do we build a building that restores our stories and our culture and creates a center for our community. And that building is every inch just beautiful and inspiring and thoughtful, and the story and the heritage of the local culture is just on every single wall. And you can't help but sort of beam with pride when you see that actually a building can be more than a building. It can be so many things to so many people, and that one is a really great example of that, I think.
That's fantastic.
Are there any homes that are certified, or one of the 27 or 28 in the world?
Yeah, so homes are probably one of the most common Living Building Challenge buildings. Most of the homes that are certified, there's none in Australia or New Zealand, but most of the ones that are certified are in the US. In some ways, homes are slightly easier. They're kind of a much smaller space, and the people who are building them are often individuals, or a family or something like that. And so the will to see a project that's hard like that go all the way through really relies on the family's values or the person's values. And that's often easier in some ways than somebody who has to make a commercial or development case for something like that. That can be a bit harder. And one home is one thing, but like a shopping center, they essentially had to do almost 46 Living Building Challenge projects because they had to take all their tenants through the journey as well. They made it super hard for themselves. But yes, there are many, many homes. Jason Mcclellan's home, which is on Bainbridge Island, I think he finished building it about a year or two ago. He has got pedal certification and is going for full Living Building Challenge as well.
Fantastic. So let's say we were going to build a house, which funnily enough we are, but that's beside the point. And we wanted to try and make it and get it through the Living Building Challenge. What would be our process? Would it be the first thing we need to do is come and talk to you guys and say, guide us, where are we going with this? Is that early up before development applications, all that kind of thing?
It does help to start as soon as you can thinking about the Living Building Challenge, so before you put in a DA application. What is most commonly done is people gather together as many people as possible that they want to work with. So it could be their architect. We've just been working with a team who are working on a wellness project, and they brought together for their first workshop, architects, builders, their chef, there's many people who are going to be part of this vision as possible. The more people on board, the easier it is, because the Living Building Challenge isn't a set of decisions you make at the beginning. It's something you have to do the whole way through. And so the people who are on the ground, the builders who are making decisions every day, they need to be part of that process as well. So the very first starting point is understanding why you want to take on the Living Building Challenge, and I think a healthy sense of determination to do so, because it aligns with what you believe is helpful. The second step is gathering your team together and having a workshop around the ideas and imagining what this could look like given what you want to build, why you want to build it, and your local context. So where is this the place in which you're building? And then you might look at, really sort of drawing things up architecturally. Gareth, you seem to you'll nail that bit. It'll be easy for you. And then doing your DA application, registering your projects. Once you've registered your projects with the International Institute, a number of things happen, one of which is you get 3 coaching calls. So what you might do is have a look at the pedal handbook, look at where you think you might get stuck in terms of the pedals, what might be challenging, and then come to your coaching calls with some really good questions about, how might you handle this, that, or the other thing. And then you break ground and off you go. I made that sound really easy, but
if it was that easy, it'd be awesome, wouldn't it? Well, I'm pretty sure Anca and I will talk about this later and decide, make some kind of decision whether we want to attempt that route and whether we financially perhaps can or not. I don't know. I assume there's some financial implications with going down this route, although perhaps the payback is over the years of running and owning the building.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I didn't realize are there any homes? I didn't realize that was a loaded question.
No, that was completely off script, and I just think we picked up on something that both Anca and I are very interested in. So.
Nice. Yes, you're absolutely right. There is an additional cost to it, but there is a payback period, and we're increasingly being able to gather the data for that sort of thing. It comes with, of course, having an ultra energy efficient home where the electricity is all generated by renewables, which you own. So you never have electricity bills ever again. Your water usage is incredibly cheap. Your heating is incredibly cheap. You've looked at all the water in terms of efficiencies. So, your water bills are incredibly cheap. So there's lots of bits and pieces where it pays off, particularly over time. And as the owner of the building, you get to both spend the money, but also see the return on it quite clearly. And I think that one of the lovely things about the Living Building Challenge is it's all systems again. It's a systems approach. And so you're thinking about things like, let's talk about water there. You'd be thinking about, obviously, shower heads is a really good example of where you could save a whole lot of water just with shower heads. But if you think about the impact of a 20% less water shower head, that means 20% less water to heat, which means a smaller heater, which means less energy that needs to be generated, which means less solar power. And they have all these knock-on effects. So really thinking about your building as a living system, and what would a living system do?
So you also own a consultancy company as well. How does that tie in with the work that you do for the Living Future Institute?
I will say it doesn't, from a perspective of I do have a consultancy, but I have not used it whilst I've had this job. Definitely being a CEO, no time at all. But how I used it beforehand, I think, was really, really relevant to getting this job. It allowed me to pursue a lot of side projects and things that I was interested in, collaborating with people that I loved working with. So even though I had a full-time job at the university or at the zoo or wherever it might be, I got to do these really interesting side projects. And in fact, quite a few of the people that I work with now, I met through doing those side projects as well. So I think just following a bit of curiosity and doing work that you care about, and the consultancy enabled me to do that.
Fantastic. So would you say that sustainability measures in the industry are moving forward, and also are they moving forward in the pace that we need them to move forward? And this is a general question across building and construction in Australia.
It's a tough question to answer in lots of ways, because I'd love to say there's this beautiful hockey graph that you can show that it's really, accelerating, but change never happens like that. It happens in pockets of excellence, and then suddenly it's a 10-year overnight success. And I feel like that's sort of what's going on here as well. We're seeing some incredibly ambitious projects, and I'm sure you would have seen the Atlassian building that was announced recently. They're doing some amazing things, but we're seeing a huge increase in commitments around net zero from all sorts of different organizations. But we know the science, and we know what we have to do. We know that we have to halve our emissions by 2030, and we know that we have to get to net zero by 2050. We also know that half of all the buildings that are going to exist in 2050 are yet to be built, right? We also know that we can't just start, buildings don't happen overnight, and we can't just be doing business as usual up to 2030 or 2049. We have to be doing these things now. I sort of use this example of, you can't eat cake all week and then you have a salad on Saturday and expect to have a healthy life. It just doesn't work like that. You have to be doing these things now. And so in pockets, as I say, we're seeing incredible things. I'd love to see a more consistent, so great that we have these showcase projects, but I'd like to see more of a consistent approach from the industry. I think it would help to have a countrywide vision about us sort of reaching net zero by 2050. I think that would certainly help give the indications to industry that we need. And in saying that, I would also say that I've experienced change can happen really quickly. I grew up in South Africa, as I said, and lived through the transition from apartheid to a democratic country. And, there were decades of fighting and advocating and a lot of work that went into the change, but it went from being one thing to another thing very, very quickly. And so I feel like these amazing pockets of excellence, they could tip from one year to the next. I think the bushfires certainly helped that. I think COVID has accelerated that as well. So it's hard to predict because it's not going to be a linear thing, but we're certainly seeing movement in that direction. Whether it happens fast enough, that is the $1 million question.
Yeah, I think it's one that many of the people that we've spoken to have said that we can do it. It's just whether we do it in time. And I don't think there's as much confidence that we do it in time as there is that we can actually do it. So.
Yeah, in some ways it's an inevitability, to be honest. I think just from things like energy efficiency, there's a cost saving, things like materials and circularity. Materials are going to be in short supply, so we're going to have to think about how to do that. So it's inevitable. It's all about timing.
Absolutely.
How are you seeing private companies' willingness to meet and beat the legislated requirements for sustainability measures? Are you seeing an increase in people coming over to you to adapt your building style? Are they interested in the certification?
Again, patchy. I'd say certainly the bushfires and COVID have pushed that or have accelerated that. And we're getting a lot of interest in our different standards. And I think that's because they're kind of intersectional, I suppose. They don't just focus on energy. They're standards that look at, climate change, biodiversity loss, gender equality, and also really prioritize things like local manufacturing, for example, because of the embodied carbon implications. And so when you're building a living building challenge or sort of any of our certifications, it's really looking at all of those things all at once. And so I think that's one of the things that makes it quite appealing, particularly right now. I'd say the other thing is we are getting a lot of inquiries this last kind of 6 months. And I think that's partly because people want to stand out and want to create a point of difference. And they're starting to see sustainability as an opportunity rather than a burden, which I find particularly exciting. And, for many years, sustainability has been this doing without. It's been really painted in quite a bad picture. And I think that's starting to be seen in, technicolor now, because there are so many opportunities in terms of the what you can do, but also getting there is creating not only, I guess, a future where it's livable, but it's also pretty beautiful as well. And I think the more we hear the stories of what's possible, the better, to be honest.
Absolutely. I mean, it's where we're at, the climate challenge that we've got. It's our greatest challenge, but it's also our greatest opportunity that's been around for a very, very long time. The way I personally see it, and I've read some others that see it in a similar way. How do you see the future of sustainability in construction? Then let's take, I don't know, you pick your snapshot of time, and how do you see that moving?
I think the industry knows where it needs to get to, and we are already seeing the early movers move, which is really exciting. I think one of the things that's driving that, and one of the things that's given me quite a lot of hope at the moment, is we're seeing the money shift along with that too. So impact investing has really grown a lot, particularly in ESG, environmental sustainable governance. And I'm sure there's a very famous cliche around like follow the money, and the money is definitely making a move to sustainability in a way that it hasn't been before. And part of that is opportunity, of course, but part of that is risk. When we're seeing things like boards having to report on climate change, insurance companies taking climate change on board, that's really been quite a big shift in what's been happening. It's not a fringe issue anymore. I think things like energy efficiency are going to continue to be incredibly popular. They're a kind of an easy political message to get across, and they are incredible. It is really important, and it does make a tangible difference to people's lives, not only in the comfort level of homes, but also in how much money they can save, and that's really important. So that's going to continue to grow, as will net zero. Materials is becoming really important, and that's partly because of the shortage that will happen and is happening in certain areas, but also because there's so much opportunity for innovation and bringing back things like local manufacturing as well. Definitely seeing a focus on that. I think one of the things that I'd like to see more of is less wishful thinking and more like we do know where we have to get to, and actually like setting targets that are in line with what is reality, rather than some magical number that you think is gonna sounds ambitious. That's what I'd like to see more of, is setting targets in line with that, and then we may not know how to get there, and we certainly don't know all the answers to it. But some of the best things we've done as a species have been exactly like that. And I do think this is sort of the moonshot of our generation. It's actually probably beyond that. We didn't know how to, get to the moon when that was announced, but we had one clear goal, there was one clear goal, was getting to the moon. And I think for us, is one clear goal is, how do we as a species thrive beyond climate change, and how do we mitigate the effects? And I think the first step in doing that is accepting where we currently are and the circumstances that we're currently in, and acting from that place of knowing rather than applying some magical thinking. I don't think that's going to get us anywhere.
Absolutely. Exactly. Where can people go to find you?
Sure. So Living Future Institute of Australia is where you can find me. Otherwise, certainly on LinkedIn. I'm not on many of the social media platforms. I'm on Twitter. I think that's about it. But I generally try to stay off the socials.
Understanding the climate emergency, what keeps you up at night?
I think on a big picture level, I think the thing that really sort of worries me and makes me upset, I suppose, is the fact that the people who are most impacted by climate change are the people who are the least involved in causing it. And just the injustice of that makes me incredibly angry. I think the other piece is going back to the magical thinking of sometimes it feels like you're going mad, right? Like, you know that we need to be doing stuff about this, but nobody else is acting like it's a problem. And I think that long term has some quite serious mental health issues for people in our industry. So how do you keep your head while those around you feel like they're completely going mad?
Yeah, I completely sympathise. On a much smaller scale, just at the weekend, I went to the farmers market, as I do most weekends, and normally it's really good there. Everybody's bringing their own bags and boxes and everything else. And then for some reason last weekend, there was plastic bags everywhere. Everybody was just picking up, and I got genuinely annoyed by it. And it's how do we've got to understand that we're going to have days like that. We're going to have days that knock us down, but overall it's hopefully and seems to be moving in the right direction.
Keep on fighting.
On a more positive side then, what aspects make you optimistic for the future?
I think it's almost the antithesis of what I've just talked about. I have the great fortune of working with an incredible bunch of people who are actively doing things on a daily basis to make the world a better place. And so I can see, I'm in a really lucky position that I can see progress, that I can see things are being done. And that's hands down the thing that gives me hope, in a way that perhaps people who are less involved in our industry are not necessarily exposed to those good news stories every single day. So that, and then I think on a sort of more macro level, it's that piece around the money, that the money is shifting and people are switching their super to ethical investments and are looking at impact investing in a way that they've never done before. And so that's a real change that I've seen in the last probably 2 to 3 years. So that gives me a lot of hope too.
So on a personal side, what are you implementing on your day-to-day life to create change?
What am I doing? Lots of different things. One of the most important things that I think I've been focusing on in the last year is building community. So being really conscious of, particularly being an expat, how do you build and maintain and be active in a community that is helpful and supportive and has your back. I think that's really important from a mental health perspective as well. So that I'd say is one of the biggest things. Moving my money to super and a bank. And I think probably one of the things that I'm really wary of about sustainability is when sustainability is absolute and you're either, you're doing the wrong things and a sort of, I guess, sustainability shaming or judgment around sustainability. What we need is, we don't need a few people doing it perfectly. We need everybody to be doing it as well as they possibly can. Don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. And so I'd rather see that, millions of people in Australia doing a lot of different things than a handful of people doing it perfectly. The other thing about sustainability, of course, is that there's so many different ways that you can take action. So finding the thing that, that you're most passionate about, the best thing you can do is doing the thing that you'll stick to and actually do. And so whether that's, cycling to work or, eating less meat some of the time, whatever it is that you'll actually do, that's the thing that's important. So so community, move your money, and just do the best you can is probably the things that I've been doing the most of.
Absolutely.
And finally, if there is one thing we can change, they will have a massive impact on the health of our planet. What would that be? How can we be good?
I feel like I sort of jumped the gun and answered that question in the one before, but one thing. I think it's very much around finding the thing that you personally care about. And some of us would say that we care about sustainability, but not everybody does. But I think everybody cares about having a better future. I've never met somebody who doesn't. And so looking at something like maybe the Sustainable Development Goals is a really good example. I think it's like a smorgasbord of things that you could do. And there's something on there that you will care about, whether that's, health and well-being and good nutrition, eating locally and supporting farmers markets, for example, or gender equality, or helping sort of your local community or working in conservation. There is something there for everybody. Find the thing that you love and just do that thing in terms of sustainability, and just do it to the best of your ability. As I said, there's no such thing as perfection. We need everybody to be doing good rather than perfect.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to learn all that you're doing and the amount of good that it's doing both here in Australia, but obviously globally as well. It'll be great if we could keep in touch and understand some of the projects that you're doing in the future. That would be absolutely awesome.
Yeah, sure. We've got quite a number of projects that are coming up. And one particularly related to play that I think you'll enjoy when that gets announced.
Okay, I'll keep us posted. That sounds excellent. Brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
So that was Laura, and I found it really impressive how positive she was about the future, about sustainability, certainly obviously in the building industry. But also I was really impressed how she's saying a number of companies are now coming to her and Living Future Institute to make and take action rather than being forced to, perhaps by government legislation and so forth.
Indeed, and I think there was another thing that she's mentioned through the interview about following the money.
Yeah.
that there's a lot more investment in sustainable practices, and it is good to know it's really looking like people are trying, governments are trying, larger corporations are joining in and are trying to change this around.
Absolutely. So it's nice having that positivity. We get a lot of, I guess, negativity and negative press and negative comments about how things are going bad. Obviously, there is a lot of things that aren't going in the right direction, but it is nice to hear some things that are as well. So, as we get towards the end, it would be great again if you could follow us, check us out on our social media, and if your friends and so forth aren't following us, make them follow us too, because we need as many people as we can to get this out there. It's funded by you and you alone. So check us out. Go to our website, www.howtobegood.com.au, and we also have our Patreon connection through there as well, and I think through our Instagram as well, and help us keep going.
Yes, and with our Patreon, I don't know if you've seen our posts lately, but we've joined Tree Sisters.
That's right.
We're working in partnership with the Tree Sisters to plant as many trees as we can. So for every single membership, there are options to plant 3 trees per month, 5 trees per month, or you can directly donate to our How to Be Good Forest and plant as many trees as you'd like.
That'll be quite good one day to do a report from the How to Be Good Forest, which has all been supported by our listeners and our followers, and we can share what can be done if we collectively get together and create something good.
It is an exciting project. We were really excited to join in with Tree Sisters and start sharing the information, and hopefully you guys are as well, and you can help us to plant some trees.
It's a great partnership. So, thanks a lot. Take care. Be safe. See you soon.
Bye.